Hello and welcome to Pain Unfiltered, where we go in-depth into the interventional pain and spine world with some of the top key opinion leaders and executives in the space. We are your hosts, Dr. Patrick Buchanan and Dr. Timothy Deere for this Aspen podcast. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Pain Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Patrick Buchanan, and with me is my co-host, Dr. Timothy Deere. Tim, how you doing as we kick off the new season, season 4 of the Pain Unfiltered podcast? And we're just a couple weeks away from the annual meeting down in Miami.
You know, Patrick, I'm doing fantastic. It seems like only just a few years ago that you said to me, hey, let's start a podcast during our annual Miami meeting. And here we are 4 seasons into it. And it's going great because of your hard work and the great sponsors and guests you brought on board. So it's honored to be here with you. We're going to be in Miami in a couple of weeks. We have some really superstars going to be at the meeting. We have Ronaldo. We have Lionel Messi. They're going to be there in Miami for the World FIFA game. So our hotel rooms are going fast. So I will tell all of our friends to get your hotel. We've already sold out one of our blocks. Our other block's almost gone. So there's not as many rooms as normal in Miami because of FIFA. So we hope everyone gets their hotel room and their flights on board. And it's going to be amazing. The energy is already building. I'm getting multiple calls and texts today from both physicians and industry partners, really getting excited about what's going to happen there, Patrick. So look forward to seeing you in your pickleball tournament there in South Beach. Can you tell us a little bit about that before we get to our guests?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. We are going to be having with the Young Innovators the first annual pickleball event with the Young Innovators on Thursday night at 6 p.m. And Aurora Spine has so graciously sponsored that, so we're working that up. We got a few sponsors. We're going to give away a few things and chance to hopefully beat Tim and I in some pickleball and maybe some other players as well there. So look for those announcements as well as we get started. So excited for that. And like you said, Tim, I think this event gets bigger and better every year, and looking forward to Miami as well. We'd also like to
kick it off.
All right, let's start this off with we'd like to thank our very first sponsors of this season, Noctrix Health. And today we have with us Shri Raghunathan, co-founder and CEO of Noctrix Health, as well as Kris Krustangel, who you guys obviously may be familiar of with his Boston Scientific Days, Saluda, as Vertos as well. And he is the VP of Sales and Commercial Operations. Thank you guys for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Great. So Shri, we'll start off with you, have you kick this off. Just talk about a little bit of your background and kind of the brief origin story, how you got into startup Noctrix Health.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, first of all. I think pleasure to be here. I've heard plenty of good things about two of you, very prolific in the neuromodulation space and pain space. It's an honor to be here to share the Noctrix story and kind of what we've built over the years. So I'm an engineer by training. So electrical engineer, designed circuits that went into cell phones, and that used to be my day. Just really got intrigued by neuroscience, for good or bad, and used to play in a band and picked up a few books on This Is Your Brain on Music by Oliver Sacks and Phantoms in the Brain by V.S. Ramachandran, and really got intrigued by, well, the brain can't be that different. It's just neurons firing on and off. It's just digital circuits. So got my PhD in neuroengineering. Well, I was definitely wrong about that easy part. Still was an electrical design engineer, but designing circuits that went in the brain. So the application changed drastically. The impact, I would say, 10x'd. The sort of job satisfaction of everything that I was doing was next to nothing else. So I was designing deep brain stimulators to treat epilepsy. So we were detecting seizures from field potentials deep in the brain, animal models. We were doing onboard seizure detection, responsively interrupting those seizures in the hippocampus and the thalamus, all the way up to the cortex. Translated some of that work into a company that was doing vagus nerve stimulation, peripheral nerve stimulation for epilepsy. They were doing implanted VNS for epilepsy. It was the only company that was doing it. I believe still is the only company that's in the space doing that. Had a chance to work on some of the algorithms that converted those devices to responsive devices to detect seizures and turn on and suppress seizures. One thing led to another, and for me, it was always intriguing to be on being able to impact tens of thousands of patient lives. One of the frustrations that I saw being at that particular, in that job, in that call point of neurology referring to neurosurgery, was oftentimes, medical devices were sort of the last resort. It's like, hey, when the patient's exhausted every single pharmaceutical option, non-pharmaceutical intervention, and then eventually they get a med device, right? So, and historically that's kind of made sense because medical devices have been mechanical contraptions. It's like a stent or a suture or a valve, and like it either holds an artery open or stitches something together. Neuromodulation to me was just so exciting and unique because it's more mechanistic and it just impacts a mechanism, very pharma-like and much more focused and specific as opposed to systemic and adverse. So it was always sort of like a pipe dream for me to say, hey, I'd love for an opportunity for medical devices to truly go toe to toe at that pharmaceutical call point. And say, if you go see your doctor and say, hey, you've got chronic migraine, well, you could take these 3 drugs for the rest of your life, or you could wear this. All things being equal, I'm willing to bet that that patient and physician would take the device 7 days out of 7 and twice on Sunday. Again, the big challenge is all things being equal, right? Like, so what does that mean? That sort of led me into Noctrix, which is clinical evidence, peer-reviewed publications, standard of care guidelines, reimbursement coverage, all of those things that we just take for granted. When you guys prescribe a drug, that's kind of taken for granted. Patients assume this is clinically valid. Physicians understand how it works. It's in the guidelines. It's covered by insurance. Medical devices have had to struggle to go through that sort of acceptance and validity. It's been a long journey. And I think I can't wait to share some of what we're building at Noctrix. So at Noctrix, we just had that opportunity to address the second most common sleep disorder in the world, incredibly prevalent, Restless Legs Syndrome. And it's a pharmaceutical market. Every single solution out there is a drug to treat RLS. So we feel we've now got this golden opportunity to go in and intervene with a non-pharmaceutical solution that is just as efficacious, if not more efficacious, considering the side effect profile. And we've, over the last 9 years, built a body of evidence, including peer-reviewed publications in some of the best journals, to where it is now the standard of care, according to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. So we're very excited to take this next step into the journey. And we're very excited to have folks like Kris join us and bring that wealth of experience from what's worked really well in neuromodulation and how do we now take this to the call point further upstream.
Shri, that's a great introduction to what you're doing. I had really not heard much about this in the past or recently. And Kris, I'm going to ask you the next question. I had a patient today on the table having an ablation. He said, Doc, I have to warn you, my legs move a lot, even during the day, but really at night they drive me crazy. And I said, it's interesting. I have a podcast in about an hour and a half. I'm going to talk to some folks who are trying to treat that with some non-invasive solutions. But, I think you and your career, Kris, I've known you for a long time. You've searched for the unmet need, closed loop stimulation, minimally invasive lumbar decompression. You've really searched for the unmet need. So I'm going to give you the chance to tell me why Shri and his team and Noctrix was the unmet need for you. Why did you choose to work in this team, and what excites you about it?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dr. Deer. It's been a long journey. It's like 20 years in the space with you in interventional pain and neuromodulation. And I remember very early on back in Seattle when I was a clinical specialist seeing some of these patients talking about RLS, as a symptom, as a chronic pain patient, and really hearing their story molded together with all their other, kind of haphazard treatments to live life. And so in the back of my brain, it was always there is like, how are these patients being treated? What does the sleep community look like? Obviously, we all have a deep passion for neuromodulation, like Shri had said, and mechanistically how it can really treat very focally the potential condition. And so once I started exploring, after my days with Vertos, it was pretty clear to me what Shri has done. And he's a very humble guy. It's almost a decade of work to bring a product that meets both the consumer medical device as well as the investor community's expectations as an option versus pharmaceuticals. And maybe you probably already know this, but most of the medications that these patients are using aren't really intended for RLS initially, right? They're opioids potentially off-label, they're epileptic medications, but they've never really been treated. And this is a condition that has one one of the highest suicidal rates of any chronic condition that we have to treat. And so I was just overwhelmed, honestly, when I found this story and heard what they were doing, where they were starting from a commercial standpoint, based on the experience I had to try to jump in and do the best I can to help make a positive impact for these patients, as well as for everybody in the team. You know, this is a pretty unique spot for us as we're growing careers and growing impact and helping each other and learning really hard lessons. But it was honestly just a no-brainer, Dr. Deere, once I saw it. So it's very excited to be a part of the team now and very excited to see the impact we're already making with the therapy.
Fantastic. Patrick?
Yeah, that's great, Shri. I'll pass this one on to you. As Kris knows, our listener have a lot of experience with neuromodulation, whether it's spinal cord stimulation, peripheral nerve stimulation. Can you talk a little bit about your device and kind of the mechanism of action behind it?
Happy to. So one of the hallmarks of RLS is a clinical diagnosis. Unlike sleep apnea, doesn't quite require overnight sleep testing or a polysomnographic recording or anything like that. It is initially walking in. Now I'm an engineer. I like to see numbers on everything, and something that was subjective and clinical was always a little squishy. But then the amazing part is the criteria. Urge criteria is what they call it. Do you have an urge to move your legs? Is it provoked by rest or relaxation? That's the R. Does it actually get better when you move your legs? And then does it get worse in the evenings and nights? So one of the classic hallmarks of RLS is that it actually gets better when you move your legs. So that's something that when I talked to tens of, maybe like a few dozen patients out of Stanford, I was observing at Stanford Sleep Labs, every single one of them would say, the only thing that can fix it is if I get up and move. I have to get up, and some patients would jump on an exercise bike right next to the bed and jump back into bed and hope they could fall asleep. So really, sleep onset insomnia is what they struggle with, which is I cannot fall asleep. And some patients have described this as like Coca-Cola flowing through their veins. It's like this unbelievable urge building up on their lower extremities, and they have to get up and walk. So unfortunately, since it's a little more prevalent in women and postmenopausal women, it often gets dismissed as like, this is all in your head, it's psychiatric, is it real? And we've actually had patients reach out literally at the end of their rope. Just this morning, we were in a management call where one of the patients in Europe had requested assisted suicide and had been approved because she just can't take this anymore, and because you can't tell, there's nothing else for her. So I kind of latched on to the hallmark of, hey, something about movement or proprioception is helping. Right? I kind of equated it to saying, hey, if you've got this unbelievable urge to kind of scratch, or it's an itch that's building up, when you scratch that itch, it feels great. It's like that instant gratification reaction. Unfortunately, that action of you scratching your itch is not compatible with sleep. It's a voluntary movement. So the hypothesis that I took to the table was, what if we use that same mechanism, but the patient couldn't actually feel the scratching of the itch? Right? Like, could you, in other ways, could you trick the ventral horn of the spinal cord and the CNS into thinking that your lower leg muscles are actually engaged and you're doing something with them, but they're not, and they're not firing motor activity? So initially we started off with like vibrating tendons to see if like, hey, because that actually simulates motion, and people have used it in the VR space where you're banking a car left and you kind of vibrate a tendon. It makes you feel like you're turning. So we tried that with the Achilles tendon, and sure enough, it feels like your foot's dorsiflexing. But again, the problem is it's not compatible with sleep. Now, the solution's sort of worse than the problem in many ways. Tried near-infrared, looked at some compression technologies, some ultrasound-based therapies to increase blood flow, and then ultimately went back to sort of what I'd done before, which was neurostimulation. We looked at the peroneal nerve as a target. It's very easy to access transcutaneously. It's a few centimeters below the skin, outside, using the head of the fibia as a sort of a landmark. And what we did was stimulate as much of the afferent nerve fibers of the peroneal nerve to elicit what's commonly known as the H reflex or the Hoffman's reflex, to basically validate that, hey, you're activating the nerve. And we know we're activating the nerve because we record that efferent response, which usually is an increase in muscle tone on the anterior tibialis. So it's the equivalent of you sort of holding your foot this way, and your muscle tone, the tonic signal, kind of goes up. But here's the thing, you're not holding your foot this way. So that's the initial hunch. And we studied this using an acute assay called the suggestive immobilization test. It's a provocative test. Simpler way to understand is the torture test. You bring in a patient, they sit down, put their legs out 60 minutes at night, they can't move, and they rate their discomfort score on an NRS scale, and you measure their leg movements. But the beauty of it is it's an acute assay, and you could try things then and there and try to see which one works. So coming from the implantable world, one of the big advantages of an implant, as I'm sure you guys know, is implant and forget. Compliance is sort of like, hey, once it's in the body, it's in the body. It's doing its thing. Not the same for wearables. Like everybody gets one of these Fitbits, in January, and it just goes to bed by March. We wanted to develop something that the compliance was driven by efficacy. And the only way that would happen is if the results were instantaneous, right? Like instant gratification was a big hook, not gamification, not any other way to kind of get the dopaminergic system to respond, but really just, hey, if your back hurts and if Bengay happens to work, the next time your back hurts, you're going to go find Bengay, right? So that's the same exact thesis we took to this and say, hey, you put this on, you get that tonic activation. So we program these for each patient, and it's compatible with sleep. So you can actually fall asleep. So now with thousands of patients using this, so we call the therapy TOMAC, tonic motor activation therapy. The brand name for it is Nidra, Nidra, which in Sanskrit means sleep. So that's essentially what we're trying to do, is help patients fall asleep. And that's 100% of what the device does. Is it's designed in a way that's compatible to be worn right before bedtime. You turn it on, it delivers about 30 minutes of stimulation, and most of our patients wind up falling asleep while that stimulation is on. Get up in the morning, recharge it, go all over back again.
No, that's a great overview. I think you really taught me a lot just now about what you're doing. I think that was very helpful. And the common peroneal nerve is really an issue for a lot of people that have all kind of neurological issues, as you know. So to have that be your target makes a lot of sense to most of us, I think. So I'm going to ask a two-part question. So Kris, I'm going to start with you and come back to Shri. One is, my people, they really, they think a lot about the efficiency of their practice. They think a lot about, the reimbursement of their practice. They think a lot about, going through the insurance process. I know my nurse practitioners go crazy trying to get things approved right now. It's gotten to be a very tough environment for approvals. So there's really two parts. One is, how do you integrate this into our practices? Patrick and I are good examples. We're in different coasts. We're, in different stages of our practice, and we need to, if we wanted to integrate this in, what's in it for us? Why would we integrate this? And then once you answer that, I want Shri to tell me who's paying for it now and what's the plan to get better reimbursement for it. So I'll start with you, Kris, on that question.
Yeah, well, because it's a prescription, it integrates pretty seamlessly. So, I mean, you have the ability right now today to initiate kind of the therapy pathway on this. The information behind this all, and Shri mentioned it, nidrarls.com, Nidra RLS.com has basically the jump off point for any of the patients or physicians that are listening. But if you don't want to prescribe it, simply just refer to someone in your community, right? That's a sleep practitioner that you probably are exchanging patients with right now. The infrastructure is very light. We handle everything from the interest of the therapy to the authorization of the therapy to the activation, where we send people generally into their homes and we show them how to use the device. And then we follow them for the first 45 days, because we've learned the first 45 days is really critical. That sets that trajectory for the therapy. And if you're not having great relief within 45 days, then just return the device and we'll actually refund it to make sure that you have a really great experience. And so as far from a workflow standpoint, Dr. Deere, I mean, it's like a prescription light. It's as much as you seeing RLS and saying, hey, I want to initiate this. The only real piece of this is refractory to medication. And like I said, at the website, there's a little bit more detail on that. We can put you in contact with local representatives or just refer it over to someone in your sleep community. We have quite a bit of penetration in those providers' offices, and it's an easy way to treat this as one of the potential conditions they come and present with you. And so thank you for that question.
No, so let's say we do that and we become believers in the therapy. Right now we're used to DME, where we have our own bracing and things of that nature. This is a little bit different. Right? This is a device, but we're not going to go through a DME provider. We're going to go through you. So Shri, what payers can we go comfortable prescribing this for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think ultimately that's been our North Star from day one, Dr. Deer, is it's that vision of like how do you get this therapy to truly be adopted, and it's coverage. It's code, payment, the third leg of that stool, which is coverage. So, we're happy to say, I think for a brand new technology, I think this is the fastest for a new tech to have its own dedicated code and payment. So we have our own DME codes issued by CMS. That was October of 24, where we got our code. So 2025 was our first full year of actually using that code and payment. We decided to become a DME ourselves instead of having to go through a third-party DME, largely because we wanted to ensure that we took on that overhead of appeals, overturning those appeals, getting it approved. So our every single payer, so for example, Medicare, every single MAC has been paying for this. So if it's a Medicare fee-for-service beneficiary, a vast majority of them pay nothing out of pocket. They have a secondary insurance that covers the part of it. And then as long as they're eligible, meet criteria, we're able to service those patients ASAP. They're able to start on therapy. Commercial payers, Medicare Advantage or commercial, it winds up being case by case. We just got our first few positive coverage policies, our first few commercial plans that have now formally issued a positive coverage policy. We have a long list of plans that are in the pipeline, working with us right now, some that have already contracted with us to go in network. But really the strategy has been very simple. We, one, have to educate them about RLS and, hey, what is this thing? How many people have it? Like, who's this for? A lot of plans don't know. They just, there's been generic dopamine agonists used in the market. So it's often not attributed to a particular disease state or condition. So they don't really know what the dopamine or gabapentin is being prescribed for. So it's a lot of market education on teaching them what this is. And then two, we show them the evidence. So today we're in the AASM standard of care guidelines, and 3 of the FDA approved drugs are not. They got pulled. So there's no more dopamine being used to treat RLS. There's only 2 FDA approved treatments that are in the guidelines, one of which is Nidra. And then 2, we show them some of the meta-analyses, not done by us, third-party people that have kind of pulled all of our publications. We're in the up-to-date guidelines, where there was a JAMA review article that just recently came out with a picture of our device out there. So for me, that was particularly compelling because I distinctly remember we sent them our very first RCT for consideration to be published. And RLS was unfortunately not an area of interest for them back then, but kind of came full circle when they talked about the change in guidelines and featured our little device there. So some of that's been incredibly helpful in getting payers over the fence. So that's how we get them covered. So typically the story is you prescribe for whoever you see fit. It's our job to make sure that they get it covered. But if it's a Medicare patient, they start almost immediately. If it's a commercial patient, we take it through prior auths, get it appealed, and we have a very high win rate at those external appeals, which is where we kind of overturn the case and start a patient.
That's very.
I just want to sorry, Dr. Deer, can I interject real quick? Just based on my experience back in interventional pain, this is one of the reasons that attracted me to this is the infrastructure that Shri and the team has committed specifically to commit to the patient all the way through this journey to therapy is something I've never seen before. That's a comment about software, hardware, people, operations. We feel very responsible once you as a provider to write the prescription that we get this patient on therapy. It's not like, hey, too bad, come back to us in a year thing. I mean, it's a remarkable orchestration of, like I said, resources and operation that Shri and the team has put together to bring every patient we can forward with this therapy. It's incredible.
No, that's fantastic. Patrick?
Yeah, Shri, you mentioned a little bit about some of the signs and symptoms of RLS. Why do you think historically this has been underdiagnosed or kind of misunderstood? And what do we need to change as physicians on how to approach these patients and diagnosis?
That's a great question. I would say a vast majority of the patients, if not all of the patients that we have over, I would say 1,500 patients coming in each month into the website, filling out like, hey, I need this thing. How can this thing help me? A vast majority of them have been on dopamine for 2+ decades for RLS. So we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg today, which is almost every single person that comes through is somebody that has been diagnosed many, many moons ago, and they've been on dopamine or gabapentin for years. So it's sort of in the Western world, at least in the US, I would say diagnosis today is much easier because patients also take a lot of self-interest in this. I mean, one of the things that attracted me to RLS early on was I was observing patients at, the sleep lab. They would usually come in for an overnight sleep study. You ask them why they're here, they'd be like, "Oh, I don't have sleep apnea. My wife sent me here. I just snore. It's nothing." But then they'll tell you that I do have RLS. I want something for this. Because this is so bothersome that they Google it, they search, they're very active online, they're very active on Facebook, on Reddit, social media. They know they come into their physician and say, "Hey, I believe I have RLS. Like, this is what I have." And that used to not be the case, even say 15 years ago. So I think with GSK launching Requip, there was a lot more awareness around like, hey, this is what it is. Dopamine agonists actually help, and these symptoms could potentially go away if you supplement dopamine. So that helped. But today, at least in the US, we see widespread acknowledgement, and people generally know what RLS is. But that isn't quite the case outside of the US. I think the Western European countries are probably very similar, but there's definitely heavy underdiagnosis and misrepresentation in Asian countries and other geographies worldwide. Partly that's because it was so humbling to learn this. I was talking to one of the chairs of the Asian Sleep Society who said, part of the challenge in diagnosis is the diagnostic scales and all the language used is English. And that doesn't translate well into the languages that we have, and that doesn't mean the same thing in the language we have. Urge is a hard thing to translate. Like, what does that mean in various different languages? So given that the scales to diagnose these things are soft, they're subjective, they're, really clinical, it depends on the expertise of the practitioner, it becomes harder to sort of objectively say this is how you diagnose it in places where the English scale does not translate quite well. So that we've heard that quite a bit, but today, at least as you go about your practice, you'll be surprised if you just, like Dr. Deer just mentioned, the number of patients that you see that have RLS that choose to just not talk about it at their doctor's office visit is shocking. It's just because they know that there's nothing else. There's just dopamine. They're already on dopamine. They don't want more dopamine. So they've just kind of given up. And that's kind of why they come over to the website. They're on social media, but they rarely bring it up to their physician. So if there's one thing at all that I've learned in my conversations with some of these terrific physicians treating RLS, it's just that if they bring it up to their patient, they're always hearing this in their practice. It's like, "Oh gosh, yes, totally, I have this. I would want something for this." But they just have given up because they feel like there's nothing out there.
We had a publication not too long ago with Tony George, his first author on SCS, and I do have people come to see me sometimes, and they want a spinal cord stimulator for RLS, but it's not approved, so I can't offer it to them. And I'll say, "Well, do you have pain?" "No, it's not pain. It's just so the rest, right?" So it ends up,
Right.
they end up with a neurologist back on Requip or other drugs, and so I mean, we do see these people, but sometimes it's so bad that they want us to do something more interventional for them. So every segment, as we get near the end of this segment, we usually have a few 30-second spots on social media to promote the segment, and I think how I would like to ask you both for, like, if you were in Miami, I hope you'll both be in Miami with us at Aspen. If you're in Miami talking to our group of folks, what does the interventional pain doctor need? What's the main things we need to know? And Kris, I'll start with you. Give us that 30-second, 1-minute spill of what we really need to know about your therapy and how it could change our patients' lives.
Yeah, only one of two approved FDA therapies for RLS. So if you see this patient, either yourself or send the patient to nidrarls.com, that'll give you the walkthrough. It is a therapy light, meaning that there'll be very little implication on your staff. We'll take on all the overhead to make sure these patients get active therapy and hopefully get a real opportunity to have a transformative outcome for what they've been suffering with.
Shri, same question. Can you give us your 1 minute reason that we should be using this therapy?
Yeah, I think I would say, most of your audience in the interventional pain space is used to devices or non-pharmaceutical interventions for debilitating chronic conditions. There's probably nothing more debilitating or chronic than restless leg syndrome, and it's very, very common in your practice, likely. And this is a non-pharmaceutical treatment that is FDA approved, non-invasive, low risk. It doesn't have some of the systemic adverse events of pharma, and a wonderful way for you to also keep track of how your patients are doing on an ongoing basis. To double down on Kris's call to action of nidrarls.com is a place to learn more about it.
That's great. We'll also put that in the podcast notes and on the website as well, the Aspen podcast website as well. But again, thank you guys for joining us. We'll wrap up with one more question, kind of forward looking, and this is for each of you as well. You mentioned this is just the tip of the iceberg. What do you see RLS and this treatment in the next 3 to 5 years? Kris, we'll start with you, and then Shri after that.
Yeah, I mean, we're just getting started. What, again, Shri and the rest of the team has already accomplished in a year and a half since the commercial launch is kind of mind blowing from a person outside of the sleep medicine community. But we have hundreds of thousands of patients still to connect and treat with. Shri briefly shared the story earlier, but we were talking about a patient today who's electing suicide over therapy. That's a cruel tipping point, and we feel very responsible to do our best to make sure that patients have awareness of this. And so we'll continue to grow and build this team both in the U.S. and internationally, and we hope to make this the same kind of, I got a headache, I need Tylenol. I've got RLS, I need Nidra. That's what the future is for us.
100%. Double down on what Kris just said. I think our North Star and our mission is millions and millions of nights of relief. Internally, we've got a rallying cry. We call this our 10 million nights goal. It's like every single time a patient's using our device, that ticker goes up. That's one more night of relief that we've provided. So we're internally shooting to say, hey, we want to get to 10 million nights of relief as quickly as possible. And that's every single person in the company that's contributing to that. It's a very passionate team of people that have all very, very productive, had productive careers, have done unbelievable things in the past, and chosen to come join us because I think that mission winds up being very compelling. They're very closely connected to the patient story. So what I'm excited about is truly expanding access to millions of patients. So which means opening up coverage, opening up more the groundswell of education that needs to happen to either have referrals or either start prescribing Nidra effectively in their practice. So we're investing in both of those. So we're heavily evangelizing the message with all of the payers. We're expanding our contracting. We're taking on, building on Kris's team and some of the infrastructure that Kris's team has to go out there and educate more and more providers about this therapy.
That's great. Thank you guys for all joining us. Tim, we'll give you your closing thoughts and then we'll wrap this up.
No, so, Patrick, I didn't know much about this before I started researching for this podcast, and I'm really impressed. I mean, I'm so impressed by this therapy being such a new advancement. And as you know, I've never been all that impressed with pharmaceuticals for many things we treat, like diabetic neuropathy and things of that nature. And we all know that things like dopamine fail over time, for sure. So I think this is so encouraging to me. And I think it's going to be another tool we have in our armamentarium we never had before. So kudos to the engineering team. I think engineering is always the key to most devices. And then someone has to go out there and introduce it to the public. So glad Kris is here as well. And thank you both for being here. And I look forward to seeing you both more and learning more about the therapy as we see it go forward. So Patrick, that's it for me. Final word to you.
Yeah, just want to echo what Tim said. Shri, great to meet you. You've educated a lot of us and our listeners about not only RLS, but some of the treatments that may impact our patients. And as interventionalists, this could be right in our treatment algorithm, getting patients away from medications and more device therapy. And Kris, you're very modest. You've been in the forefront of a lot of these technologies for over 20 years. So we appreciate you coming on and always glad to have you here and supporting this as well. So thank you guys so much. Hopefully we look forward to hearing more about this as we go on. And we hopefully look forward to seeing you guys in the meeting.
Appreciate it. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks for the time.
This
Thank you
wraps
both.
up.
Pleasure to be
This
here.
wraps up episode 1, season 4 of the Pain Unfiltered podcast. Thank you all for joining us.